Country Watch Political Intelligence Briefing Quick Hits, a weekly briefing of hot stories across the world in brief. I'm Denise Youngblood Coleman, the Chief Editorial Officer and Senior International Affairs Analyst at Country Watch. This week I'm featuring Australia, given the elections that just took place on May 22, 2022. The main election battle was between the ruling Liberal National Coalition, led by the incumbent Conservative Prime Minister Scott Morrison, and its main rival, the centre-left Australia Labor Party, led by Anthony Albanese. The Greens, United Australia, One Nation and other minor parties, and several independents would also contest the election. Polling data in April 2022, ahead of the May 21, 2022 election day in Australia, indicated that the opposition Labor Party was holding onto a clear lead over the ruling Liberal National Coalition. That polling data turned out to be predictive. Once the polls closed, it was clear that Australians had opted for change. The incumbent Conservative Liberal National Coalition of Prime Minister Morrison would not garner enough seats to hold control of Parliament, and that Morrison's time at the head of government had come to an end. The only question was whether or not the Australia Labor Party, led by Albanese, would have enough seats, 76, to command a majority in Parliament on its own, or if it would have to form a coalition with the Greens and independent candidates. The counting continues, but so far Labour has won 73 seats, just 3 short of a majority. The Conservative coalition has taken 55 seats, the Greens garnered 3 seats, and independent candidates secured 9 seats. In plain terms, Albanese and the centre-left Labour Party had soundly defeated the Conservative coalition, and Morrison had been decisively ousted from power. Morrison quickly and graciously conceded the election. The performance of the Greens and Independents would prove crucial to whatever government emerges in the new Australian Parliament, very likely functioning as kingmakers for Albanese. The role of the Greens and several independent female candidates running on climate action campaigns would be vital in terms of the go-forward agenda for Australia. For his part, Albanese was set to become the 31st Prime Minister of Australia. In his victory speech in Sydney, Albanese sounded a note in unity and promised to bring the Australian people together, saying, "My Labour team will work every day to bring Australians together, and I will lead a government worthy of the people of Australia." The incoming head of government vowed to invest in social services, give Aboriginal people a greater voice, and to end the climate wars. One of the questions I like to answer when I write about elections around the world is, why is this election important? Why should it matter if you're not from this country or that one? I'm going to try and answer that question by saying that Australia has strengthened its relationship with the United States in recent years due to United States President Joe Biden's focus on Asia-Pacific security interests. Of particular significance was a recent decision by Australia to withdraw from a deal to purchase submarines from France. Instead, Australia would work with the United States and the United Kingdom to develop nuclear submarines. Any shift in government in Australia would undoubtedly bring with it questions as to shifts in that burgeoning partnership at a time when Russia and China pose some degree of threats to the Western world. The victory for Albanese and the Australian Labor Party also signalled serious commitments going forward as regards climate change action. In Israel, the ruling coalition lost its slim majority in the Knesset when one member of Prime Minister Naftali Bennett's Yamina party defected from the government. That happened in April. The situation for Bennett's fragile coalition became even more precarious amid Israeli-Palestinian violence at the Al-Aqsa Mosque that led in May 2022 to the exit of an Arab-Israeli member of the Knesset from the left-wing Meretz party. The move left Prime Minister Bennett with just 59 out of the 120 seats in the Knesset. That loss of majority in the Israeli parliament did not necessarily translate into the collapse of the broad coalition government. The dissolution of parliament and the call for fresh elections would require a parliamentary majority of 61 seats for passage. The coalition, led by Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid, consists of parties from the Jewish right to the left and includes an Arab Muslim party. And the reality was that most of the parties included in that broad coalition shared a shared antipathy for former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Likud. They were united in their desire not to see Netanyahu lead the Israeli government again. They were not of the mind to provide Netanyahu with a pathway to retake power. I'd also like to take some time to discuss the war in Ukraine. A few weeks ago, I discussed the ongoing siege of the Avosta steel plant in the strategically vital port city of Mariupol. That siege has ended, and the fate of those at the steel plant was not known. What was known was that the strategic port city of Mariupol was utterly destroyed. Not all news was good for Russia, though. Russia simply was not making the progress it anticipated in Ukraine and was stalled. At issue, strenuous Ukrainian resistance and Ukraine's effective capacity for targeting Russian logistical weaknesses. Instead of quickly sweeping across Ukraine with one military success after another and decapitating the leadership of that country, Russia has been forced into withdrawal from the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv and was forced to refocus on the east. As Russia refocuses its efforts on the Donbass in eastern Ukraine, it was coming up against stiff resistance. Of note was the fact that the Ministry of Defense of the United Kingdom estimated that Russia had lost about a third of its ground combat forces since the war began in February 2022. As well, there were reports that Russia could be running low on crucial supplies of unmanned aerial vehicles. In the northeastern region of Ukraine, the Russian military had been carrying out an assault on Kharkiv. The Russians had bombarded Ukraine's second largest city with shelling relentlessly for months. But a Ukrainian counteroffensive was able to push back Russian troops and recapture some territory. The success of the Ukrainians into Kharkiv may have been partially due to the influx of tanks, heavy weaponry, and other military arms and ammunition provided by the European countries and the United States. But military experts have noted that the real reason for Ukraine's success in Kharkiv was its effective use of artillery by special forces and spotters using drones. On the other side of the equation, Russia was stymied by poor logistical planning and communications channels that were often intercepted by Ukrainian intelligence. The battle for Kharkiv was not completely over, though. Although the Russian military withdrew to the outskirts, they remained well dug out into new positions and were located in sufficiently close proximity to shell the city relentlessly. One story that, let's call it adjacent to the war in Ukraine, is that of Finland and Sweden and the applications for NATO membership in the face of Russian aggression in Europe. As part of NATO, they would have the benefit of protections from Article 5 of the NATO Charter. Article 5 stipulates that an attack on one member state would be viewed as an attack on all, with an obligation for mutual defense. Thus, NATO's accession would likely seem self-preservation to both Finland and Sweden. NATO holds an open-door policy as regards aspirants to membership in the Security Alliance. That being said, membership requires the consent of all 30 members. While NATO countries such as the United States have welcomed NATO accession for Finland and Sweden, Turkey has a very different view. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said that Turkey would not look positively on Sweden and Finland's NATO applications unless its concerns regarding Kurdish militancy were addressed. Turkey has accused Western countries, especially Sweden, of harboring Kurdish militants that it views as terrorists. For Turkey, the PKK was no less than a terrorist organization. For other countries, however, Kurdish nationalism was seen as a legitimate aspiration of self-determination. Those differences were now being highlighted in sharp relief given the bids by Finland and Sweden to join NATO. There are some other developments unfolding internationally that I'm covering this week, but we'll cover more extensively next week as part of a special report focused on China's influence internationally. Germane to that theme will be President Joe Biden's unequivocal assertion that the United States would intervene militarily if China attempts to take Taiwan by force. I'll also cover China's military strategy in the Solomon Islands and how it has sparked concerns internationally. On a similar note, I will be looking at China's expanding geostrategic influence in the Pacific, particularly its negotiations and pacts with Kiribati and Vanuatu as part of China's Belt and Road initiatives in Djibouti and Caribbean will also be considered. Subscribers can read more about these and other stories at the Country Watch website at www.countrywatch.com. I'd also like to take this time to mention my comprehensive Afghanistan withdrawal report called Sunsets in the Graveyard of Empires, which is available for purchase at the Country Watch website at www.countrywatch.com and also at Amazon. Thank you for your time. Have a great day, and remember now, more than ever, we live in an interconnected world.